Hello, welcome to the Motorsport Review. I am your host, Berry Lizzie Brown. If you don't understand that reference, I would like to implore you all to go and listen to the dirty side of the track. I'm getting it straight in, out of the way. I was asked to be a guest. Thank you to Rob and Brian for having me along. Had a great chat with them. Really fun talking about Formula One, my fandom of it. Those guys are just consummate professionals at what they do. I, on the other hand, and my production have a very early version of what I want this to be. So it was nice to be on a proper podcast for a change. But if you listen to this, thank you very much. And as I say, go and check them out. They are America's leading Formula One podcast. But you're here listening to Britain's 35th motorsport podcast. And today we are here to talk about a different motorsport once more, not Formula One. Of course, yes, the shakedown has started, at least for most of the teams. I think 7 of the 11 teams were in action today. We are here to talk about the Daytona 24 hours, or the Rolex 24 at Daytona, to give it its proper name, and to talk about such an epic race with me this year, this night, it is nighttime in the UK where I am, is the wonderful Louis. Louis, how are you doing, sir?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Lizzie. I'm very happy to be participating on this episode of the podcast and hopefully give a more broader view of the Rolex 24 for our listeners. So please, if you want to enjoy more episodes of the Motorsport Review, please like, subscribe, and share to everybody so you can enjoy this journey for us and with us to other motorsport series across the year.
Couldn't have said it better myself, because I'm not professional enough to do so. Yes, thank you for that. Exactly that. Please do the liking, the sharing, the subscribing, and all those lovely things that help us reach out to upwards of 10 people at each recording. As I say, we're here to talk about the Daytona 24. I can't turn around and say that I am the biggest endurance fan. That's hands up. You know, we've all got the things that we do love, but we covered this last year and I did enjoy it. I did also discover through this and the Dakar, which we covered last year and last week even, that I am a Ford fan. So it was exciting to come back, knowing full well now that I support Ford, and to actually be invested in this race with a bit more fandom that had already grown over this year. So watching the race and suddenly not being completely neutral, almost like, you know, how I watch Formula One completely as a neutral, but coming into this race and having a favorite was very interesting to myself. Let's go into a little bit of history about this. You're going to be better at this, Louis, so I am just going to throw the reins straight over to you. But talk to us a little bit about this race, because I made note last year about this being a sort of standout event for the fact that the cars I didn't recognize as being used anywhere else other than Daytona, and they were in fact called Daytona prototypes almost specifically for this race. And I thought it was like a one-off, and then learned more as I was researching for this episode last year, and for this episode tonight, that actually it was a bit more than that. And now what we see is very akin to World Endurance Challenge, but you're going to tell us why it isn't World Endurance Challenge, the similarities and the differences, because there's quite a few big players that are making big steps either one way into IMSA or out of World Endurance Challenge. So handing over to you, tell us all about the history and what is Daytona 24.
Okay, so let's start with the classes. As you mentioned, DPI used to be the top class in the IMSA Sport Cars Championship. So DPI is Daytona Prototype Internationals, is the abbreviation for what is now GTP, and they were derivative from the old American Le Mans series, the top class. So they are prototypes basically created with no rules over them, just the balance of performance to keep them in check. But they could be whatever they wanted. So we had Cadillacs, we had Mazda, we had Acura racing for a couple of years, and they were ridiculously fast, and engines were from small 4 cylinders to big V8s and hybrid. So DPIs were very experimental and extremely expensive cars, similar to the LMP1s, but they race like hell Some of them were ridiculously unstable. Others were like seeing, I don't know, like a Cadillac, road going Cadillac, just smooth. Every time you see them hitting a curve, it was just fast. And like you said, there were some teams that migrated from those years to IMSA now. So we have teams like Andretti that joined forces with Wayne Taylor Racing. So now it's called WTR Andretti. We have Team Penske, which is a well-known team that's running the Porsches. We have the WRT that's running now the BMWs. And I was quite surprised you're saying being a Ford fan because there is McLarens on the field. They are run by
There is.
Rahal Letterman Racing, the RRL McLarens. And I thought, wow, there's McLaren. So Perry may be cheering for them. But listening to you saying you're a fan of Ford and you're being cheering for them, that's quite surprising for me.
I definitely split my allegiance. I did see the McLaren going around. There was, I believe, only one that RLL were operating, and seeing it going around, I was still going, yeah, go on. But I think Ford have more of a presence here, and we'll talk about next year perhaps. I believe Ford are doing IMSA, but McLaren aren't. Perhaps I could be entirely wrong about that. So maybe we'll see the Ford prototype, but not the McLaren. But they will be certainly alongside each other, racing against each other in WEC, and certainly I'll be supporting McLaren in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a part of me that thinks, well, if not McLaren, then be Ford. And it's great. The GT40 that used to race as the GT car as well, I just thought was an absolutely stunning car as well. So maybe I already knew, as a Ford fan, but certainly, as I say, watching these and thinking, oh, I'm going to be completely neutral, and then going, no, I don't want the BMW ahead of Ford or whoever they were running ahead of. I wanted, say, Cadillac this year. I was supporting them in the GTPs. So I just love the symphony of noise. We're going to get into that noise that these cars produce, but yeah, it was, you mentioned the team names as well. I thought it was almost like watching the IndyCar teams say, like, look, IndyCar are going to send like their secondary crews out to Daytona. We got a lot of drivers driving for different teams as well, but as you say, RLL are a well-known IndyCar team. Penske, the IndyCar team. You've got Meyer Shank Racing that operate the Acura. I'm probably missing so many others as well that operate in IndyCar. So there's really these powerhouses of American racing. I was going to say sports car racing, but just American motorsport represented on that grid. So I wanted to talk about this last year. I kind of hinted that the podcast almost started thanks to IMSA, and someone tweeting and saying, my God, are people unironically watching IMSA? My God, fight back F1. I think it was. There was a period of 4 weeks there wasn't F1, and people were going, hey, look, there's this other motorsport, there's IMSA, there's this really cool racing going on, like, let's go and watch that. And people going, no, this isn't as good as Formula One, and hence why there's a motorsport review that says you can enjoy racing. And I was pleasantly surprised, of course, to find so many people enjoying the Daytona 24 this year, watching it and just enjoying it, and realizing that yes, we've got Formula One coming up, but it's motorsport. And I wanted to say to you straight away that it's free and available on YouTube. Like, that's massive. I've covered so many different series. We've covered so many different series over this last year, where I sort of expected access and didn't have anything. You sort of go, oh no, you need to subscribe for £35 a month on top of everything else you subscribe to. But Louis, it was free to watch all 24 hours. So A, were you watching on YouTube as opposed to, was it on TV in Brazil? And B, how much of this race did you manage to watch?
Actually, both. Actually, they are broadcasting live on TV from a motorsport channel called GPTV, and the same broadcasting TV channel was on YouTube alongside the IMSA YouTube channel broadcasting the race. So if I wanted, I could watch it on TV normally on a channel or straight up on YouTube. I'll admit, I think I watched probably the first 4 hours of the race before I needed to sleep to go to work. And then, honestly, the race had a 6 hour basically stoppage for the fog. And then I think I just watched maybe the last hour or last 30 minutes of the race when I left work and got home. So there's a lot of the race I missed, unfortunately. I plan to watch to get back up to speed. But I think I saw the recent highlight IMSA posted on YouTube just to catch on the middle portion of the races I didn't watch. And boy, most of the fun, let's say, was from the GT cars battling around Ford, Corvette, BMW. They were all hauling ass, and Aston as well.
Yeah, I managed to watch quite a lot of this. I managed to miss. So last year I watched the start and a little bit in the middle and then the end. This year I managed to miss the start, watched a little bit thereafter. I went back. I was about 4 hours in when I started watching, so I went back, watched the start, and I sort of skipped forwards in stages until I was live that evening. I hate when things come up and get in the way of watching motorsport, but anyway. So I then caught up, went to bed, and I was saying to you before we started recording how last year you wake up, the first thing you think of course, is motorsport. It's not how is my daughter doing? Is she okay? Has she got breakfast? Is she looked after? You're thinking straight away, like, I've got to catch up on the Daytona 24. Last year, found it relatively easy. I thought, oh no, you're going to be up to speed, then you're going to miss 6 hours, and suddenly the order's going to be different, and it's going to take half an hour to catch up. But it's just a nice thing. You just drop in, you just start watching, and there's racing on, and your mind almost just goes, do you know what? I'm calm. I'm watching motorsport. I'm watching cars go quick. This year almost had like a perfect scenario for us Brits, certainly, where I woke up, went to tune into the race, and went, oh, if you're just joining us, yeah, we're under thick fog here, as you mentioned, and the race has been sort of paused or neutralized and been running around behind a safety car for 4 hours, and we're not expecting green for another two. So I thought, perfect, I can catch up on everything that's happened. Watched a little bit more, and then again missed the end of the race, so was able just to duck in and out throughout the day and just enjoy like a little bit of racing, a little bit of racing there, and really enjoyed that part of the experience. But there's something I spoke to Amber about, when we did the introduction. She's our sort of resident endurance racing fan, the person out of all of our group that's going to do the 24 hours. If she has to sit and watch all 24 hours, she'll find a way. And I said it was one of my big fears of watching 24-hour races. I'm not going to have understood, because I mean, are you the same, Louis, when you watch Formula One? If you miss even 5 laps, you're like, I've got to go back, I've got to see what happened for those 5 laps. So yeah, would you'd go back, I imagine, and you have to watch like the entire race. You can't miss any of the Formula One race.
Yeah, that's mostly right. And the thing about a 24-hour race is that if you want, you can separate it in brackets. Like if you want to focus on specific period of the race, because it's almost impossible for you to organize your schedule around a race that's going to split between the weekends. So you kind of prioritize, like, okay, I'm going to watch the beginning, and if I can catch up like the middle portion like you did, and the end of the race. So I have most of the parameter of what's going on. And there's no actually rules like in Formula One. You want to catch up with everything. If you miss 5 laps, you want to watch those exactly 5 laps to know what happened. And in endurance racing, if you lost hours of the race, you can chill out because they were part of what happened, but they ain't gonna, let's say, properly determine how the race is gonna pay off in the end. They might have an effect, but not something they can reverse.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Like every hour adds up to the 24-hour race. Obviously, you can't just sit in the garage for one of the hours and then expect to win the race in the other 23. But in terms of if you miss an hour watching it as a fan of motorsport, you don't feel like you've lost an hour. You just feel like you maybe need to go back and they're very good. The commentators. That's one thing I wanted to highlight, was how good the commentary team are. The people in the pit lane, people that are in the commentary booth, and they call it's radio, IMSA Radio. I think it was IMSA Radio, and they're so good at keeping you entertained, keeping you informed on what's going on, trying to guess what people might do strategy wise, bringing guests in. Mark Rushbrook at one point was in, and I'm just listening to him talking about Ford again, thinking, oh my god, this is the guy. I'm a Ford fan here. And yeah, I think even potentially last year they had maybe Zach Brown, because he was there doing demo laps, so he'll just at some point just drop by like a radio show would do. So it's just always entertaining. You just drop in, watch a bit of racing, the spectacle, the sound, it's just incredible. Absolutely loved it. Let's talk about the 2026 event a little bit more then. So qualifying already had that little bit of drama. Again, slight Cadillac fan in GTP, really excited. Jack Aitken and the rest of the crew in the 31 stick it on pole, and then pretty quickly realized, no, sorry sir, you're down and out the dumps. But can you talk to us a little bit about why that was, why they got dumped out of qualifying?
Yeah, so the Cadillac, the Wheeling Cadillac for American Express Racing, they did pole with Jack Aitken, but they were disqualified because the rear mounting strut of the car, it was unaligned. It's kind of like the skid marks, but the floor edges on the Formula One car, if they get too damaged or get in position, those prototypes, especially the GTPs, they have a very sensitive floor. Although they don't look like it, they can produce more downforce or reduce drag depending on the position of those struts. And the Cadillac, it had I think it was about 2.5 degrees of positioning. So the car, when it started to reach high speeds, instead of bottoming like some of the prototypes would, you saw a few sparks jumping and you could hear them scratching when there's on board. The Cadillac was just stable because it creates some sort of air pillow below the car, kind of like a mass damper, and that's illegal because it's technically an adapted part of the car, and it was caught on post inspection, so the car was disqualified. And the number, I think it was the 93 for Meyer Shank Racing that inherited the pole.
Yeah, it's again, it's one of those things where you think 24-hour race, does pole really matter? And certainly last year, all the teams that got pole position didn't go on to win the race. I was going to look that up before today, whether the pole position cars in all four classes won their race. But it's one of those things where, you know, they weren't shuffled right to the back. They still start in class order. So they started on the road 11th, which doesn't sound that bad. You know, thinking Formula One terms, if you got thrown out of qualifying, you'd be re-managing all of your strategy or rethinking all of your plan at Le Mans, at Daytona, or whatever endurance race. If you get shuffled out of qualifying, you just go, well, we have a quick car, we'll just overtake instead of lead from the front. So yeah, slight spoiler, they were there at the end. Don't worry about them, they were still there. So yeah, can we talk about the importance of qualifying then? It's quite a short format really, given that they're going to race for 24 hours. I know Le Mans do like an hour of qualifying. Here I think it's 10 minutes per class, isn't it? They go out, do their laps, and pretty much that's it. They set their order and then go from there. But confirm the qualifying format for someone that, like myself, as I say, disclaimer, doesn't know endurance racing quite so well.
No, you basically call it for the way it is, but the difference is, we talked in private on the podcast group, there's something called Roar Before 24. As I think a week before the race actually starts, it's kind of considered the preseason / testing and / practice sessions for the Rolex 24. And that's where the IMSA regulators apply the BOP for the cars. So that's where you have the parameters on who's going to be where coming quali and somewhat expectations for the race. And during that period, we had like the fastest cars in terms of top speed were the Aston Martins, the BMWs, and the Porsches, tied for first, second, and third, with maximum power allowance for speeds over 240. The balance of performance for IMSA works a bit different from the World Endurance Championship because they have two separations for power bands. One is for speeds below 230 kilometers an hour, and the other is for speeds above 240. So that in between 10 kilometers an hour, between 230 and 240, is like a linear progressive boost of power or regress of power. In that case, for speeds below 230, the fastest cars were the Acura and the Cadillac with the maximum power allowed. And over 240 is the Astons, BMWs, and Porsches. But the thing is, the Acuras and BMWs were the heaviest because of the balance of performance, and the lightest were the Astons and the Cadillacs. And funny enough, as we saw by the end of the race, the more balanced cars in terms of power between low and high speeds and weight was Porsche and Cadillac. Those were the cars that were mostly evenly matched between power to weight ratio and power bands and low and high speeds. So we saw that on quali with the Action Express Cadillac, the number 31 Wheeling Engineering getting pole, but the Porsches being back throughout the Roar 24, they weren't focusing on speed. They were focusing on consistency and laps. Because one thing we accustomed to shorter races don't tend to give much of a thought is how much temperatures and climate changes over a day. So during a hot afternoon, cars are going to operate one way. During the evening towards the night, another, early morning, dawn, and so on. There's so many details the cars need to work on different windows and be consistent all around throughout those 24 hours.
That was really interesting. I remember discovering that last year when they suddenly said, right, we've got to that part of the night now where they can use soft tires. And so they're only allowed at night, and it helps the car's grip when those temperatures drop. And when, as it was this year, the fog sets in. So it was really interesting to see them talk about the night as like a really different period of time, as you'd imagine. As you say, you kind of just forget about it and take it for granted and think, well, the lights go out, so the lights come on and the sun goes down, and they just carry on racing with fireworks. But no, they have to rethink. And I think they alluded to on the broadcast, I think it was Penske Porsche being worried about their pace at night. So they were massively helped by this fog coming in and the full course yellow. You know, when you're expecting your pace to drop to like 2 seconds down, 2-3 seconds are down a lap, and suddenly you're not losing that kind of deficit, and you just got to think, okay, when the sun does come out, burns away the fog, we can go at our usual pace. So yeah, it was great to see that overnight. And as I say, it is a spectacle watching racing at night. I always thought that the first time Formula One went to Singapore in 2008, I think it was,
Yeah.
and you saw the exhaust popping, you saw the lights going, you know, it's the brakes glowing. There's just something magical about seeing motorsport at night, and Daytona doesn't disappoint in that regards with the Ferris wheel, with the fireworks. It's just something to behold in the night. And as I say, I almost didn't want to go to bed and miss that part of the race, but I did. I was a sensible Perry for once and actually went to bed, missed a bit of it. I thought I can always catch up on this later. But yeah, the balance. So the balance of performance then, and World Endurance Championship versus IMSA. So I mean, kind of alluded to like these championships being really under the cosh. As you say, the Daytona prototypes were very expensive and designed pretty much for one race a year, and then just rolled out as and when they could to try and justify that money. So suddenly we've got an influx of teams, of manufacturers wanting to be involved, and I think that's great to see. But talk to us about Penske then. They've opted not to contend in World Endurance Championship. They have therefore completely said we're not going to do Le Mans, which is a big shock, right? That they've turned around and said this, and outright, especially when you consider how good they were. They dominated quite often this 24-hour race. So the news of them pulling out of World Endurance, were you quite shocked by this, or did you see it making sense to you?
In a way, I saw making sense because over the course of 2025, there was multiple reports saying Porsche Motorsport division was in some sort of financial crisis, and it weren't feasible for them keeping multiple activities at once. For them, it made sense to keep IMSA because they are competitive and they are one of the juggernauts of the championship. But it's a shame they chose to leave the World Endurance Championship because, like, what, 2 years ago, they were world champions. They dominated basically the whole season, and they were the first LMDH cars to win the World Endurance Championship because prior was just Toyota and now Ferrari, but they all hypercars. They are not LMDH. So it was a shame seeing them leave. And the thing that soured most of the fans is that they chose to double down their efforts on Formula E and pull out of the World Endurance Championship, but stay on IMSA. And their reasoning is totally plausible when you forget about the emotional aspect. They were just seeing, they were just thinking, where are we competitive? They are one of the most competitive teams in Formula E, and they are one of the most competitive manufacturers and overall operation in INSA. So it was not much of a debate choosing what to ask. Let's be real. The World Endurance Championship is a world championship. They go from everywhere. They go from Saudi Arabia, they go to Qatar, they go to Brazil, they go to United States, they go to Britain, France, Japan. So whether we like it or not, it's expensive travels because it's not just a small team, like small team with some huge air quotes. They're moving humongous cars, humongous parts for hours. They have everybody from part of the team, reserve drivers, equipment, all of that. So it is expensive. So they chose what is financially sound and like the quid pro quo, what is worth to keep and what is worth to leave. They chose is not the one we would like to, but it is what it is.
I was going to say exactly that. With a number of manufacturers like Mercedes, Audi, the big ones, Porsche. They seem to just come into different sports just as someone else leaves. It's almost like the sort of like thinking of Scooby-Doo and the doors opening in the corridor and Scooby pokes his head out and says, Formula E, is anyone here? And then door closes and then Mercedes go, we're here. And then they just seem to come into different series just as someone else leaves. Audi have come to Formula One now, and of course they've left Dakar, for instance, to do exactly that, which has left Ford there taking on Toyota. So wherever you look, you get some little hints of these rivalries, but you sit there and go, man, I would love Porsche to just do everything. I'd love Audi to do everything. And as you say, it just isn't feasible that that's ever going to happen. So yeah, it makes sense to prioritize the ones you're doing well in, obviously. So let's talk about the race then. And I've got quoted here that you can't win the race at the first corner because, especially in the LMP2 field, it seemed like everyone was trying. Again, spoiler alert, that statement doesn't come true at the end, luckily for one team. But I mean, 24 hours, right? You don't win the race at the first corner, but bunching for space, you don't want, if you can be fifth place, you want fifth place, not sixth, right? So bit of bunching and then the inevitable contact. There was a lot of carnage beyond that. The first 15 minutes or so, it was brutal almost.
Yeah, it was. I feel like this probably is the beginning, the most chaotic beginning for 24 hours in Daytona in recent memory. I remember the commentator saying that it's been years since that many yellow flags were thrown right at the beginning. So as you mentioned, the first corner incident, there were two LMP2 cars and a hypercar. It was the BMW getting, I don't know if they got hit or they just lost control, but it was one of the BMWs being on a grass. Then two LMP2 cars hit each other and it just spun around and created a huge smoke and felt like a bunch of other cars got involved as well. And to top it off that, there was I think a clash between GT cars right in the beginning just to throw in even more madness at the beginning. I mean, there was craziness happening in pretty much everywhere you look at it, and Ken basically couldn't keep up with it.
It was pretty insane. It was almost like the adrenaline just built up. But I imagine as well, with the lack of tire warmers in the series and this race, everyone's just ambition far outweighed their adhesion. But it was just, as I said, it was just funny to see. You think 24 hours, just surely get through turn one unscathed. And one of those cars, as I said, the GTD entry, it was one of the Porsches, but I can't remember who was driving at the time, hit the pit exit wall, I was going to say.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. They locked up going to the first corner. They kind of locked up the rears, even though they had the ABS on, as the commentators pointed out, but they lost it. They went through that little patch of grass that is between the exit of the pit lane and the racing line. Is the RS1 Porsche for one of the rookies. I think it was one of the American rookies or something like this. And he hit the tire wall that separate the returning from the pit exit and the track. He hit that so hard that I thought, oh my God, he might have a concussion. I don't know. It was violent. It wasn't a light touch. It was violent.
I always hate it when there's a wall like that that's, you know, just dead on, kind of like the wall at Monza.
Yeah.
And they put so many tires in front of that wall for this exact scenario. But even then, seeing like it was like 4 or 5 layers of tires just get squashed to nothing almost, and rip this car, the corner off this car pretty much, and it had to retire on the spot. So you can imagine all this preparation, all this build up, getting this car ready, being one of those other drivers that hadn't yet driven the Porsche yet, and your car's out and you're sat as a spectator. I mean, there's worse places to be spectators of, but when you're there to compete, I'm sure that's still not a silver lining on your day. So yeah, we saw a lot of incident in the opening minutes, and a big part of Daytona is the traffic. And again, I made note last year when I did watch the race, at the start of the race, sorry, that it took about 10 minutes for the GTP cars to catch the back of the GTD field. And yeah, whenever I watched, and you're watching, you know, focus on this battle in GTP, we were obviously fascinated by these battles going on in GTD and LMP2, but it's pretty much the GTP dominate the broadcast. And when you're watching them, when you're on board and they're chasing down, as they will do later in the race, and you're seeing this gap go from 1 second to 2 seconds, and they're going through this traffic, that is a huge part of what this race is and what these drivers have to do, is navigating that traffic, isn't it?
Yeah, dealing overtakes with multiple classes, especially when they're dueling each other. I remember that in the early hours, there were some GTDs fighting each other, like Corvettes, BMWs, and a few Mustangs, while there were some LMP2s and GTPs coming their way, and they just couldn't, pull aside and let them go. They were fighting for position. They were fighting for the lead. And that's something really, I think you were spot on saying they need to know when to make the overtake so they lose as little time as possible. And we saw that throughout this, especially on the ending of the race, because let's be real, we can separate the race in 2 parts. Prior to the fog and after the fog, it became a sprint to the end. They were just pushing flat out. And we saw even more fights than in the beginning of the race. So dealing with traffic is extremely important, if not the most important skill you need to get, especially if you're on a GTP.
Yeah, it was, as you say, towards the end of the race when they were just pushing through, and then as you say, they're racing and there's no blue flags, so they don't have to get out of the way just because of prototype cars coming through. And this opening sort of few corners of the lap are very tricky to navigate if you've got 2 cars that are fighting. You end up just sort of having to sit behind them for a few corners. Towards the end of the lap, you've got the first speedway oval corner into the what I want to call the bus stop chicane, is actually the Le Mans chicane.
Yeah.
And then another speedway corners, and even through there we're seeing cars get sideways and even a little bit of contact. So it was no easy measure to get by even there. But even then you see the cars, the GTP sort of having to go up round the high side of the banking, do like the wall of death around the outside, and hope beyond hope that the cars on the inside have spotted them and don't just go for a move up high. So yeah, really interesting. And I made note here as well that they were pushing throughout. They were talking about the distance record, obviously didn't get broken, but I've spoken before about about this on the Motorsport review. The reliability of motorsport and motor cars in general is so good. Unless you're an Aston Martin Valkyrie, unfortunately, which was just riddled with mistakes throughout. I don't think I watched a hour window where we didn't at least see the Valkyrie once pulled over on the side of the track in the night. You know, had the headlights off, full like electric off, thought that was it, and then the car fires back into life, goes back to the pit lane. Towards the end of the race, it was behind the pit wall. It wasn't the best race for Aston Martin. I felt for them. I feel we have to talk about them. They were in this race, but for as close as all the fields were, there were a few cars and a few drivers that had more issues than others.
Yeah, they were pretty much incognito for the whole race, and it's kind of comprehensible because it's a new car. It debuted last year, and thankfully, is the same team running both cars in IMSA and the World Endurance Championship. Is the Harder Racing, baptized as Thor, Aston Martin Thor team. So it's kind of
Great name.
helpful that, yeah, I love the name as well. It's kind of helpful that is the same team running the operations on two different championships, so it's more data for them to fine tune the car, understand it. And we saw last year that the Aston Martin had a lot of potential, especially on Fuji, where they led races, they were fighting for podiums, they were qualifying really well. In IMSA as well, we saw a lot of potential for the Valkyrie, but they still had those reliability gremlins to deal with, especially electronics. We saw, I think, what, 3, 4 times the Valkyrie stopped with electrical issues. Either the engine lost power, or the car simply shut down, or they didn't have any lights during the night. And oh my God, I just remember the commentator team talking about how difficult the procedure of the GTPs are for restarting. And one of them forgot that the Aston is the only hypercar that doesn't have any kind of hybrid, and they just can restart it normally. He said, "Oh yeah, that's a good point. I started laughing so much at this."
Yeah, I mean the biggest shame for me was the sound. You know, I've just commented on the Instagram about it being the perfect symphony, because they said, what's the best sound? Is it the Cadillac V8? Is it the V12 of the Valkyrie? And I just think it's the two together. I just think
Yeah.
they you know, you couldn't have a symphony without your string section. You couldn't have it without your brass section. You've got to have everything together. And yeah, it's got such a high pitched roar as it goes past, as opposed to the brutal V8 inside that Cadillac. And
Is
the way that Cadillac starts, the videos of it leaving the pit lane, you know, goes out the pit box and hybrid, and then there's that like that as the V8 kicks in. It's like, oh, it does unspeakable things. It has to be said.
that's for people that are into cars. We can say that's our pornography. That's our
Yes.
eargasm. We listen to beautiful engines like it's the seductive voice of the most beautiful thing ever. As soon as the roar of both the Valkyrie and the Cadillac are on site, you just stop and enjoy the moment. That's all you do.
If you, yeah, so Motorsport review top tip: if you're on Tinder or, you know, Plenty of Fish or any of these other sites and you're struggling to find matches, then just make your bio just that noise, those two engines, and you'll reel them in. Moving on, I described that Cadillac noise twice this weekend as just pure sex. It's just so good. But moving on before my wife hears and thinks, what the hell am I talking about? The strategy, less sexy talk, strategy. You, as you quite rightly put it, from the start of the race, teams are having to go about 50 minutes to an hour if they can extend a stint between pit stops. Like any other sport, you want to reduce how many pit stops you do, but it's quite interesting, isn't it, that you start off just maximizing your stint lengths. A driver can only do 4 hours in every 6, so you're trying to change them at the right points, as well as the tires. You don't want to use them all at once. And at some point towards the end, especially when there isn't a fog delay that sort of determines when that point is very abruptly, some point during the race, you have to turn around and start going from the start of the race forward to the back of the race back. And you start to go, okay, there's 2 hours 30. If there's a safety car now, it's a big risk to take that pit stop. If you're leading, you probably wouldn't do it at that stage. If there's 2 hours left, everyone darts to the pits. It's really interesting to see that the sort of shift of recalculation is going on all the time as they work out how much longer is going on. So talk us through some of the strategy. As you highlighted, it kind of got taken away from them, but it was interesting towards the end. You had the two Porsches versus the Cadillac on very different strategies at that point.
Yeah. First thing first, the Michelin, they brought step softer tires for this year's. So the idea was to make more difficult for manage both the tires, the pressures, and keep the cars on track as, let's say, more competitive manners, but adapt their strategies. And I think we saw the Porsche with hard tires by the end and the Cadillac with mediums. So Cadillac put all their tips on making a all-out guns blazing final stint, pushing straight to the flag, while Porsche tried to play more conservative and go for the long run. And in a way, it kind of works because, as I mentioned before, the balance of performance, Cadillac and Porsche are the more balanced cars, but Cadillac has a higher acceleration, but Porsche has a better top speed. So they are constantly trading blows. And especially when they go through the second half of the circuit, which is more the oval and the super speedway with the high bankings and constant acceleration, the Cadillac always catches up to the Porsche, but is never able to make a move because Porsche has that just a little less weight and just a little bit higher top speed. So it's a bit difficult to make their final move. We always saw them go really close into turn one, but when we go to the midfield session, Porsche start to pull away, and then Cadillac start to running back and just catch him up. And the same thing happened to other cars like BMWs and Acuras. They started the race really strong, but as the night went on, they started to lose pace. And Acuras were one of the fastest cars, but they just lost it. You never saw them back at the top. They were top five, maybe top four cars, but they didn't have speed to match Porsches and Cadillacs. And that's what we saw for most of the race. It was either Porsche or Cadillac up front.
I mean, Porsche, as I said earlier, kind of dominated the race. Anytime I tuned in, they were either first or first and second. Pretty much, they were the car to beat. And then even as you say, they got towards the end of the stint, and they were running first and second with a very fast closing Cadillac. And the commentators were saying, could the seven was this the seven that won? So could the 6 car play a role and hold off Cadillac just to give them the few laps potentially they need? But that turn one, so you're saying about them closing in down the back straight and down the home straight, and then that turn one. Now it's on Gran Turismo. Pointing over here because that's where my PlayStation is. I play Gran Turismo a lot. I race this track a lot, and that turn one is so difficult. So if you're trying to pull a move, it's so easy to get that corner wrong as you come off the banking and then onto the flat. That transition, you don't really want to be braking as you go across that transition. You want to get down off the banking early, get the car braked as much in a straight line, but it curves slightly to the left to stop you doing that as much as possible. It's a nasty corner they have to do for 24 hours, really. It's quite mean they make them do that. But yeah, as you say, discussing the winners then, which was the number 7 Porsche. Interesting last year how Nick Tandy, we spoke about this, became the first to ever win the Grand Slam of the 24-hour races, which are Daytona, Le Mans, Nürburgring, and the Spa 24 hours as well. Amber's favorite race. And this year, just 1 year later, Earl Bamber was hoping to become the second. And he was in that car that finished second by, I think, 1.5 seconds away from joining Nick Tandy in that class. So maybe next year, Earl Bamber, it's his year perhaps. But yeah, that 1.5 seconds. You imagine racing 24 hours and then you're 1.5 seconds short of that overall victory. So really
Yeah, that's kind of gut wrenching. But if we watch the end of the race, we know that traffic played the ultimate game changer for that result for Porsche, because traffic, especially during the last 7 to 6 minutes, is started to become really heavy, especially on GT cars. They were fighting a lot, and in one of those, Porsche got stuck for I think like a half a lap behind one LMP2 and two GT cars just fighting each other. He got stuck, and the Cadillac was almost 2 seconds back and cut it 1 second and a half. In that moment, it was just breathing on the back of that Porsche, and they go back to the home stretch through the bankings, and the Cadillac tried to pull a move around the outside. They had a GT car right in the middle of them. They tried to make a replication of the 2023 move from the Cadillac around the outside, but the Porsche always defended the position. Felipe Nasser is one of the best drivers in endurance right now, and he always the closer. For the last 3 years, Porsche always put Nasser on the final stint of the number 7 car because he just knows what to do. He developed that car as part of the program with Porsche. He was the first one to sign up, and that car is basically his baby. He has his handprint all over it. So if there's somebody who knows how to take everything out of that car and put it exactly where it needed to be, it's Felipe Nasser. And we saw that for most of the end of the race, defending every single attack from that Cadillac and just finding the right spots to make overtakes so the Cadillac would be delayed and he could have some sort of breathing room.
Yeah, there's a reason they put the best drivers in at the end. As we say, this race almost works backwards. You want that quick finish at the end. It's all about, you know, getting to those last 4 to 2 hours and being on that lead lap and being in that fight. So that's the crucial moments of the race. You want your top guy or girl. Guy seems sexist, but sorry about that. Yeah, guy or girl driving the car at that moment, as you can understand. So that's Felipe Nasser. And in the winning car, you've got Julian Andlauer and Laurin Heinrich as well, were the 3 victors in GTP. But I quickly want to talk again about the Cadillac in the second position car. We have to mention Connor Zilisch.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not the biggest NASCAR fan. We reviewed NASCAR last year. I reviewed it twice because didn't give it a good enough chance, and then we've watched the season. You are a NASCAR guy. Connor Zilisch is a name I've heard about, which says a lot about his his skill and the reputation that he is gaining for himself. And honestly, he is an up and coming talent. I think he's 20 years old, and they left him in the car. At one point, the commentators were saying they've left him in the car. There's not anything this guy almost can't do. He should have won this Xfinity. I can't say that that word. And yeah, I mean, hand over to you as the NASCAR guy. Like, give me some superlatives about this young man.
Man, Connor Zilisch is probably one of the most hyped up talents, young talents from the U.S. in quite a few years. Originally, Zilisch was never supposed to be on the NASCAR ladder. He was in Europe racing cars and going through the European ladder towards Formula One. But unfortunately, the thing that happened to most drivers is he didn't have enough backing to move away from karts to actual open wheel cars, Formula prototypes. So a colleague of his say, hey, go to the US, try to go through Indy Next or NASCAR. And Zilisch just did that. He went through NASCAR, did a few part-time races here and there, and just caught the attention of one of the biggest teams on the sport, at least the second professional series, like you said, the Xfinity series. Now it's called the O'Reilly series. They changed names. And the thing about this race in particular, Connor almost didn't compete because he didn't have enough license points. He needed to win the Xfinity Championship last year to get enough points to compete this year, which he lost the championship on the final race because of the playoffs format. And he was gutted because he already signed a contract with Cadillac. He already was announced as one of the drivers for the American Express team, the number 31, and he lost the championship and didn't get enough points. So both his NASCAR team, Junior Motorsports, and the William Engineering Cadillac team, they made a motion so he could be allowed to compete because he did everything right. And they gave the waiver so he could compete on the 24 hours of Daytona. That was something he was planning for well over a year.
Oh, that's incredible. I didn't know any of that. I knew that he's moving up to the top series. He's going to race with Trackhouse, I believe, in
Yeah.
NASCAR, the top series, the Cup series. And crucially, they've done away with the playoff format as well. So he'll be one of the people glad about that. We spoke about that. Is it the right way to do it? You guarantee you got a championship fight right until the final race. But Connor Zilic was the story and the argument against it. And sure enough, they've done away with that. So I'm sure we will cover that later in the year. I mentioned right at the start of the race review about can't win the race at the first corner. One of the cars facing the wrong way was the CrowdStrike Racing by APR car in the LMP2 class. They only went and won it despite facing the wrong way. They had a monster recovery drive.
Twice.
I mean, twice.
Yeah, they spun it again a few laps later after the begin. They spun it around in turn, I think was 4, and they needed to wait the whole field come through because it's still not that spread. So the GTPs, the LMP2s, the GTD Pros, the GTDs passed it through, and he could come back on the race. So twice he was at the back and came back.
I remember they said already when they were lapping him, they said that's the CrowdStrike car that's had been in the wars. I completely forgot, or didn't realize that they'd had a second spin. So I mean, what a recovery drive! And when you think that LMP2 is all the same cars, so we talked about GTP, GTD, they've got different cars managed by BOP. LMP2 is everyone is in the Oreca same chassis.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that they managed, in the same car to come back and win that. Avenging their miss in 2025, they lost out by 0.016 seconds, I read as well. So what a way to do it, facing the wrong way. And that was driven by George Kurtz, Alex Quinn, Maltha Jacobson. Very sorry if I've
Malcolm Jacobson.
There you go. Well, he said, I could get this last one. Toby Sowery as well driving that car. So well done to those four. What a recovery drive. And very quickly to look at GTD. Not Ford, unfortunately. I was watching them, but they didn't really feature that much. They had, I think it was 1 or 2 retirements as well in this race. But what was really interesting was seeing the General Motors Ford rivalry. We've seen a little bit of in Formula One already. I can't remember which way it started, but I think it was someone at the Cadillac launch.
It was Ford.
Was it that way around?
It was
Ford that started it? And they said, well, they're not making their engine. It's a Ferrari engine. It's not really a Cadillac, is it? And Cadillac fired back and went, well, that's not really a Ford, is it?
That's the thing. They started as the director of engineering for Ford Racing, and then the CEO of Ford say they are a fake team. They don't build their own engines. They're using Ferrari engines. We've built our own engines in partnership with somebody. That's where, Ford and Chevrolet, they already had their rivalry for years now, and they are just going to a bigger stage. And that's the excuse we needed for something extra.
I love it. Absolutely love it. I think I described possibly something like this as shithousery. I'm going to use that word again because I do love a little bit of rivalry, of getting one over, these little barbs, these little comments. So we did see a bit of that in GTD Pro as they were really roughing it out, fighting for the win. But it was the Pratt Miller Racing BMW that came out on top instead. So
actually, it's the Paul Miller. It's the Paul Miller BMW. The irony is there's this huge rivalry between Paul Miller Racing and Pratt Miller Racing. There's a huge rivalry between them especially
Okay.
last year, because they used to run BMWs, both of them. But then they chose to run Corvettes for Pratt Miller, and Paul Miller stayed with BMW, but they reduced to one car. So there is
Right.
some rivalry between siblings in there, but Pratt Miller became the focus for General Motors and Corvettes program in IMSA and for racing with Momatic. This year, they chose to trading blows with each other because there was some sour tastes on GM on last year because they were battling for the win with BMW. We saw their fight, the middle finger in the straight last year.
Absolutely
So
epic.
yeah, absolutely. So this year they want a revenge because Ford capitalized it on the unfortunate happens between BMW and Corvette, and Ford capitalized it and won last year. So this year they want a revenge.
I read as well that they did it with strategy as well. They
Yeah,
won this race, so they weren't really leading GTD Pro, and then at the last stop, they basically took a bit of a gamble, 12 seconds less as they took on less fuel, and then basically tried to hold that lead advantage and managed to hold on to it as well. So that strategy element coming into it again, taking a shorter stop, but you got to manage that. It's not really, it is fuel, but it's all measured by energy, isn't it? So that
yeah,
again, to try and balance it out, if you've got a hybrid car, they can't get away with going further just because they've got batteries that help them and they use less fuel as a result. So that was the team of Connor De Filippi, Dan Harper, Max Hess, and Neil Verhagen. So well done to them. And then finally we had GTD. So I think the difference between them, there's no machinery difference between GTD Pro and GTD. It's just driver levels that they're allowed to run. So we had a Mercedes. So got a win for BMW and a win for Mercedes in GTD. And we saw, I think this is the clip from Daytona 24 of the racing between the Aston Martin and the Mercedes up on the banking.
yeah,
Little bit of contact, but rubbing's racing, right?
yeah.
This was the shot, wasn't it? That racing side by side.
That final moments between the GTD cars with Winward Racing and the Aston Martin, I forgot the name of the team. I apologize for that. They were they were scrapping a lot from the midfield, but when they took the lead, the let's be real, the Aston Martin that was up front most of the time was the Harder Racing 27 Vantage. So that Aston Martin Vantage brought out of nowhere and started fighting the Windward Mercedes, and the Windward Mercedes was one of the fastest GT cars on a field, at least from GTDs. And when they started fighting, I was legit thinking at some point these two are gonna crash because they were so close with each other. There was no room. They weren't giving any room. Like the infamous Fernando Alonso radio, you always need to leave a space. Every time you need to leave a space, there was none of that.
No, it was there was a bit of Aston on Aston contact, just wheel to wheel racing we call it. But this, that move up in the high side, I thought that's a bit more than a bit more than rubbing his racing. Got away with it, but worth noting at this point. I don't know why I'm noting this at this point, just because I've read it. But in talking of penalties, that last year we saw penalties sort of coming in sort of 3 days after the race. So although we're going through the winners, that could still change. I don't think sort of on track, but scrutineering wise, there may be something that came through, which happened, as I say, in LMP2 last year. The winner was given a penalty and dropped down from the win down to, I think, 5th place in the end, and it went to United Autosports. So yeah, do bear in mind that this sort of happens a lot. Scrutineering can take a few days, but as long as nothing happens to change it, for Winward Racing Mercedes, the winners were Philip Ellis, Russell Ward, Indy Dontje, and Lucas Auer as well. So congratulations to them. Right, the only thing to really wrap up on at this point is the next races in the IMSA series, which is the Sebring 12 hours.
I
I'm
love
not
that
sure what
track.
it is, but it was mentioned a few times. This is a very different track. It's
Yeah,
really bumpy. But Yeah, tell us. Do you know when that is?
Is I think in 2 months in March. I don't remember the exact date, but man, I love the races in Sebring. Sebring is one of the best tracks I think there is. It's tough, it's challenging, and it's a bumpy hell. They don't level the track specifically for that. There's parts of the track that are so plowed, so bumpy that you think they're gonna crash, they're gonna broke the car. And sometimes the track looks like it's an abandoned airport and just they just build the track around it. And some other times it feels like this is a track abandoned for like 70 years and they don't bother fixing it up. If you watch an onboard from any any division, you see how bumpy Sebring is and how technical it is. There's no room for mistake. You make one mistake in Sebring is gonna cost a lot of time. If Daytona already costs time, in here it's gonna punish you. I love Sebring because of this.
I made a note of it last year about Sebring 12 hours. They were alluding to it, and I think depending what's on, I think we might just cover it on this show because it's something. It's another race which I've heard a lot about and then never actually sat and properly watched. But if it's free on YouTube, I'm there instantly. So I think we ought to cover it. But in terms of this review of the Daytona 24, I think it's time to wrap it up. Louis, thank you so much for joining me, being my resident expert on the Daytona 24. I'm sure we'll hear from you soon, but in the meantime, thank you so much for bringing your passion once more about motorsport to the Motorsport Review.
Let's just hope next time we actually have the endurance gearhead with us, because I feel like Amber could have added so much to this episode, because I do enjoy endurance, but there's a lot of gaps between my knowledge, and I think she would be perfect to add up to everything we're doing right now. So I don't think we're gonna, if we will probably cover the 12 hours of Sebring. I hope she can make the episode because it's gonna be really fun having her around.
I'm gonna have to message now, aren't I, and get the calendars the calendars clear. Make sure, yeah, absolutely. She is our resident expert on endurance, and I'm sure she did tune in, but unfortunately couldn't join us tonight. But yes, wherever you are listening from, thank you so much for listening to the Motorsport and watching the Motorsport Review. As I said at the start of the show, if you want your Formula One fix, someone cover like a podcast that is well put together, the hosts know what they're doing. Sometimes they have great guests like a Berry Lizzie Brown. I'm really sorry if you listen to that episode, it can only go uphill because they'll have much better guests than I will. But for your Formula One fix, sorry, go and have a listen to the dirty side of the track. Thank you again to Rob and Brian for inviting me along. And if motorsport's your thing, then this is where to stay. And we will be covering Formula One, of course, but in a reduced capacity. I'll go through that later on in the season as it gets closer to. But for now and for tonight, or this morning, or wherever you're listening to the Motorsport Review, thank you very much. Do like, do subscribe, do all of those beautiful things. And most important of all, have a wonderful day. See you spoon.